Some people think age makes you weak, but the truth is it only makes you tired of being disrespected. When I sold my small farm, I planned to use the money to finally rest, to fix my health, to breathe a little. My son believed that money belonged to him, because in his mind I existed only as a wallet. The day I refused, the mask slipped. He shouted, his wife screamed louder, and before I could even reach my keys, a trash can flew through my car window, exploding into glass. I didn't fight back. I didn't beg, I simply watched, memorizing everything. 20 minutes later, they discovered why I had always warned them not to mistake kindness for weakness. My name is Marable, I am 67 years old, and I spent most of my life working a small farm with hands that never truly rested. Sunrises meant chores, and sunsets meant bookkeeping by lamplight. I raised children between harvests, patched clothes instead of buying new ones, and turned worry into prayer whenever bills outgrew the crop. People think farmers are simple, but the truth is we keep more numbers in our heads than most offices do. After my husband passed, the land felt heavier, but I stayed because it was all I had. I believed my children would one day understand the sacrifices buried in that soil. I didn't expect entitlement to grow faster than any seed I ever planted. Selling the farm was the hardest decision she had ever made. Every fence post held a memory, every field a chapter of her life. But age doesn't ask permission. It simply arrives with doctor visits and endless pills. She wanted security, a small apartment, enough savings to stop worrying, maybe a trip to see the ocean once in her life. The offer was fair, the paperwork is honest. When the money arrived, she breathed for the first time in years. She assumed her family would be happy for her, proud even. Instead, whispers began, not of gratitude, but of expectation, as if her future belonged to them the moment the check cleared. Her son didn't ask how she was feeling. He asked how much she'd made. His voice carried a casual certainty, as if the money had already been wired into his account. He talked about investments, business ideas, paying off debts, all using funds that were never his. When she gently explained that the money was for her survival, his face hardened in a way she had never seen before. Respect faded. Accusations replaced it. Suddenly she was selfish, ungrateful, and hoarding what should stay in the family. It stunned her not because he wanted help, but because he believed he was owed it. The argument didn't burst, it escalated in sharp, cutting steps. Words lost their softness. He raised his voice. His wife added fuel, calling her dramatic, insisting old people don't need that much anyway. The kitchen felt smaller, the air tighter. She tried to keep calm, explaining that independence wasn't greed, it was survival. But they didn't hear a mother, they heard a vault. When she refused again, the room erupted. Plates rattled. Insults landed heavier than any harvest load she'd ever carried. And for the first time, she saw the truth clearly. They valued her money more than her years of love. She walked toward her car, heart pounding, hoping distance would cool everything down. Instead, chaos followed. A trash can, metal heavy, flew through the air and crashed into her car window. Glass exploded everywhere, glittering across the seats like cruel confetti. Her daughter-in-law stood there, breathing hard, eyes blazing with entitlement rather than regret. Her son didn't stop it, he only shouted louder. Neighbors peeked through curtains. Shame burned through her chest, but she refused to cry in front of them. Kindness, she realized, had protected them from consequences for too long. She didn't scream. She didn't argue. She simply stood beside the shattered glass and let the moment etch itself into memory. Silence often frightens people more than anger, and it did. They kept shouting while she mentally stepped away, one boundary at a time. Years of sacrifice erased in minutes. She had always believed blood meant loyalty. Now she understood it only guaranteed proximity, not respect. Right there beside her broken car, she decided the conversation was over forever. What they didn't know was that she had prepared for the worst long before signing the sale. She drove away slowly, glass crunching under the tires, hands steady despite the storm inside. 20 minutes, that's all it took for the future to shift. In that time, she made 2 phone calls, opened one secure folder, and pressed send on documents that would seal her safety beyond anyone's reach. Legal protections, witness statements, and recorded messages, everything already arranged, quietly waiting. While they were still shouting in the driveway, the first consequences had already begun moving toward them. She had warned them never to mistake kindness for weakness. Soon, they would finally learn what she meant. When she arrived home, she didn't collapse into tears. She opened a locked cabinet containing neatly labeled folders. Long before selling the farm, she had consulted an attorney who specialized in elder protection. Every document bore dates, signatures, and clear instructions. The funds were placed in an irrevocable trust in her name only, guarded by strict clauses against coercion and abuse. She called the attorney first, then the bank manager. Both reassured her that the trust was already flagged, and the attack on her car only strengthened the record. For the first time that day, she felt safe. Her life's work had not been left vulnerable to tantrums or entitlement. She had protected herself quietly, wisely, completely. Within hours, the attorney filed a formal incident report attaching photos of the shattered window, her medical history, and previous messages demanding money. The paper trail was undeniable. Copies went to the bank, the trust administrator, and a family court liaison who specialized in elder abuse. Every word her son had texted, every threat, every accusation now sat inside a legal file instead of just her memory. She didn't want revenge. She wanted distance, safety, and recognition of what had been done. Paper, she learned, can be stronger than anger. It preserves truth when voices try to rewrite the past. The next day, her son called not to apologize, but to demand an explanation. Calmly, she told him there was nothing to explain. The farm had been legally hers. The proceeds were legally protected. He had no claim, no authority, and no right to intimidate her. When he tried to argue that family money stays in the family, she finally said the words she had swallowed for years: respect does too. The call ended with stunned silence. For the first time, he realized the money he thought he controlled had never belonged to him, and neither did she. Reality arrived for him like unpaid bills stacked at the door. The attorney's letter outlined clear boundaries: no further contact unless respectful, no financial claims, and full responsibility for the property damage, documented and actionable. His bravado faded. Fear replaced it, not fear of jail, but of accountability, something he'd rarely faced. He tried to shift blame to stress, to misunderstandings, to anyone but himself. But the mirror of consequence doesn't blur easily. He suddenly understood that his mother wasn't fragile. She was prepared, and there was no undoing what had already been recorded. His wife unraveled faster. Panic spilled into frantic messages, half apologies, half defenses. She insisted the trash can had slipped, that emotions had been high, that surely the family didn't involve lawyers. But fear sharpened the memory of neighbors watching, glass everywhere, her own voice raised in anger. She had always believed the older woman was too gentle to fight back. Now she faced the truth. Gentleness is a choice, not a weakness. And the moment she chose violence, she also chose the consequences that followed. News travels faster than apologies. Neighbors who once waved politely now looked at the couple differently. People whispered about the shattered window, the shouting, the entitlement. Some quietly reached out to the older woman with meals, rides, and soft words of support. Others pulled away from her son, uncomfortable with the truth they'd seen. The community doesn't always speak loudly. Sometimes it simply shifts its weight, standing beside the one who was wronged. And for the first time in a long while, she felt seen rather than used. Through it all, she never raised her voice. She refused to argue online, refused to trade insults, refused to let anger rewrite her character. Her strength lived in quiet boundaries: signed papers, closed doors, calm responses. She focused on healing, on replacing the broken window, on drinking tea in peace. She understood that dignity isn't about winning loudly. It's about refusing to lose yourself. And while others scrambled to explain themselves, she simply continued living, protected, steady, and finally free from the weight that had once called itself love. Independence didn't arrive as a celebration, it arrived as quiet mornings with clear plans. She met with her advisor, finalized bills, and set up automatic payments so no one could ever accuse her of needing help. She ordered a safer car, installed cameras, and took self-defense classes offered free at the community center. Each step reminded her that safety was a right, not a luxury. She cooked for herself, tended a small balcony garden, and let peace enter her home. Independence didn't mean being alone, it meant being safe inside her own life again. The family didn't break with a single argument, it cracked in quiet stages. Relatives chose sides, some whispering that she'd gone too far, others quietly admitting they'd seen the disrespect for years. Her son pulled away out of shame and stubborn pride, while his wife tried to rewrite the story to protect herself. Holidays grew awkward. Invitations disappeared. But instead of chasing harmony, she allowed distance to stand. Sometimes separation isn't cruelty, it's protection from people who mistake access for ownership. Consequences didn't knock, they walked straight in. Insurance refused to cover the damage because of intentional destruction. Repairs came out of his pocket. Job opportunities slipped away when his temper followed him to work. Friends stopped visiting as gossip hardened into fact. He realized too late that reputation is fragile, and witnesses remember. The money he counted on was gone, and the person he took for granted no longer answered every call. For the first time, he felt the echo of the loneliness he had left her to face. Meanwhile, support arrived from unexpected places. Neighbors offered rides. Church ladies brought soup and stayed for conversation. A retired teacher helped her organize receipts. The banker called to check if she needed anything explained. None of them wanted money. They offered something better: respect without agenda. She joined a senior walking group, laughed more than she had in years, and remembered she was more than just someone's mother. Kind people didn't fix everything, but they reminded her the world still held warmth beyond the shadow of betrayal. Her boundaries became steady, not sharp. Calls went unanswered until voices softened. Visits required notice. Conversations ended the moment tones turned cruel. She didn't explain these rules, she simply lived them. The same woman once too afraid to say no now used the word easily, kindly, and consistently. Boundaries didn't push love away. They filtered it, allowing only what was real to stay. And the more she honored those limits, the lighter her life became. Regret reached her son quietly at night when distractions faded. He replayed the broken window, the shouting, the insults said in anger that could never be taken back. Pride had cost him trust. Entitlement had cost him a relationship. He began to understand that apologies aren't magic, they must arrive before damage hardens. For the first time, he wondered whether forgiveness was even his to expect. Regret didn't excuse him, it simply forced him to see what he had done. Eventually, the past stopped hiding. Meetings with lawyers, insurance forms, and conversations with relatives kept circling back to one truth: they had crossed a line that should never be crossed with family. She didn't rub it in, she didn't dramatize it. She simply allowed reality to stand unbent. And as everyone finally faced what had happened, one thing became clear: respect is easier to give than to earn back once it's broken. The lesson had arrived. Whether they changed because of it was now up to them. Formal consequences did not roar into her life. They arrived as certified envelopes and calm phone calls. The attorney forwarded the police report, the repair estimate, and statements from neighbors who had witnessed the trash can crash through the glass. Insurance confirmed liability, and restitution orders followed. A mediator suggested boundaries in writing, including distance requirements and limited contact to respectful topics only. She didn't celebrate. Consequences felt heavy, even when deserved. But she finally slept without fear that another outburst would leave her unsafe or penniless. Law, which had once felt distant, now stood between her and those who had confused love with possession. Apologies arrived eventually, carried on trembling voices and lengthy messages. They spoke of stress, of pressure, of money worries that had twisted love into entitlement. She read every word kindly, yet the apologies floated on the surface of a lake already frozen. They did not repair the shattering of glass or the memory of fear in her chest. She answered with grace, thanking them for their words, and explaining that forgiveness is not the same as access. If trust is a bridge, it must be rebuilt plank by plank. Their regret mattered, it just could not undo what had already been done. Later, in mediation, she finally spoke without interruption. She described years of small dismissals, the slow hardening of entitlement, the terror of watching metal smash through glass while insults flew like stones. Her voice remained gentle, yet every sentence carried the weight of truth. She explained that love without respect becomes a debt that can never be paid. The mediator nodded, documenting boundaries, payment plans, and expectations for respectful contact. For the first time, the story existed on paper rather than only in her heart. Telling it did not erase the pain, but it returned her voice to the center of her own life. He could not undo the past, but he began to face it. Therapy sessions replaced angry phone calls. Budgets replaced daydreams about sudden money. He apologized without excuses, learning to listen when she spoke instead of planning his defense. Sometimes he slipped back into old habits, and she ended the conversation, reminding him that respect was now the price of entry. Slowly, he noticed that responsibility brought a steadier peace than entitlement ever had. Change did not make them close again, but it did make him more human, and that was a beginning neither of them expected. He carried that lesson into every corner of his life. His wife struggled most when the story could no longer be spun. Witness statements, photos, and her own texts painted a picture that no apology could edit. Employers raised eyebrows. Friends stopped justifying the outburst as a bad day. She had to face that violence had been a choice, not an accident. Eventually, she offered a real apology, stripped of explanations, and began community counseling. Whether change would last remained uncertain, but for the first time she understood that charm cannot hide character forever. Actions, like shattered glass, remain visible long after the shouting ends. Owning that reality was the first true step she had ever taken. Trust did not return with signatures, meetings, or even tears. It arrived, if at all, in small, consistent choices: respectful messages, calm visits, quiet departures when voices rose. She kept her world simple and her circle small. She allowed conversation but guarded her peace, knowing that scars do not vanish just because the wound has closed. Some days hope flickered. Other days memory reminded her to be careful. Trust, she learned, is a garden. It grows only when tended daily, and it withers the moment neglect returns. So she measured progress not by promises, but by patterns that stayed gentle. Protecting her future became an act of self-respect, not fear. She kept the trust intact, updated her will, and named a neutral executor so no one could pressure her again. She chose doctors she trusted and neighbors who checked in without prying. She traveled occasionally, planting new memories where grief once lived. Most importantly, she forgave herself for not seeing the danger sooner. The past still whispered, but it no longer commanded her. She had learned that the greatest inheritance a parent can leave is not money, it is the example of refusing to live without dignity. That lesson would outlast every field she had ever sold. You might think the story ends here, but it doesn't. Hit like, subscribe, and stay with me. The real turning point is just ahead. Life rebuilt itself slowly, like a garden taking root after a storm. She created routines that protected her peace: morning tea, quiet walks, reading in the afternoon sun. Bills were paid on time. The trust stayed protected. She decorated her home with soft colors and old photos that reminded her of who she had always been beneath the struggle. Independence no longer felt like loneliness, it felt like air. She found comfort in choosing what entered her life: conversations, people, commitments. Nothing rushed, nothing forced. Peace wasn't dramatic. It was steady, earned, and deeply gentle. Respect became the foundation of every interaction. If voices rose, she stepped away. If messages sounded demanding, she didn't reply. People learned slowly that kindness was not optional with her anymore. Even her son spoke differently now, weighing words he once threw carelessly like stones. She did not chase validation or apologies. She allowed people to show who they were through consistent behavior. The difference was simple: disrespect no longer survived in her presence. It wasn't punishment, it was self-protection. And with that boundary in place, conversations softened, including the one with the child who had once frightened her. Her son discovered that responsibility leaves no room for entitlement. Repair payments, counseling, and steady work replaced daydreams about easy money. He began to listen more than he spoke. Pride didn't disappear overnight, but its edges dulled. When he visited, he brought groceries instead of expectations. He apologized again, not with speeches, but with consistent effort. She accepted the gestures without surrendering her safety. Love was possible, yes, but only when paired with accountability. For the first time, he understood that respect cannot be demanded, it must be earned, one honest day at a time. Unexpected allies appeared throughout her rebuilt life. Neighbors became friends. A community officer checked in kindly. The bank manager called occasionally, not for business, but to ask if she needed anything explained. Women at the senior center shared their stories, some heartbreakingly similar, and together they learned that boundaries could bloom even after years of silence. These connections weren't built on need, they were built on mutual care. She finally belonged somewhere that didn't ask her to sacrifice herself to stay. That quiet sense of safety felt like a new beginning rather than a fragile gift. Family no longer meant automatic access. It meant mutual respect, patience, and space when emotions grew sharp. She stopped measuring love by holiday invitations or loud declarations. Instead, she watched for small, consistent signs of care. Sometimes they gathered for dinner, choosing calm over confrontation. Sometimes they stayed apart, honoring distance rather than forcing closeness. And that was all right. Love had changed shape, not gone, not perfect, simply wiser. She finally allowed herself to accept connection only where it felt safe. For years, guilt had followed every decision she made for herself. Now, it no longer had a place at her table. She could say no without shaking. She could rest without apologizing. She could protect her future without fearing she was selfish. Peace became a companion rather than a visitor. She understood that kindness toward others means little if it requires cruelty toward yourself. And so, she chose both compassion and boundaries. Her life didn't end in bitterness, it settled into dignity. She looked out over the world she had rebuilt and felt grateful not for what she lost, but for what she learned. She had protected herself, demanded respect, and proven that age does not make you powerless, it makes you brave enough to stop accepting less than you deserve. And somewhere, her son finally understood that lesson too. The fields were gone, the money was guarded. But the greatest harvest was peace, grown from courage, watered by truth, and safe at last.